I knew something was off the second I saw Marlene Kingsley's bleach blonde bob bobbing across the sidewalk like a rooster on a mission. She was wearing her usual pastel tracksuit, clipboard in hand, and that fake smile she reserved for when she was about to ruin someone's day. I was standing in my driveway, sipping coffee and minding my own business when she marched up like she owned the place. "Yorick," she said, her tone syrupy and sharp all at once, "we need to inspect your backyard today. HOA protocol. It's part of the new initiative." "You should have gotten the notice." I didn't flinch. "I got it. I also read the bylaws. Backyard inspections require at least 72 hours written notice and a valid reason, neither of which you've provided." Her smile twitched. "Well, we noticed some overgrowth peeking above your fence. Could be a violation." I didn't bother hiding my annoyance. Could also be a rose bush, still not a reason to demand access. Marlene huffed and scribbled something on her clipboard. "Refusal to cooperate noted." "Knock yourself out," I said, walking back toward my garage. "Fence stays closed." That should have been the end of it. But of course, power-hungry Karens like Marlene don't take no like normal people. I thought she'd at least pretend to play by the rules. I underestimated just how far she'd go. Around noon, I was inside fixing a loose cabinet hinge when I heard a thud from the backyard. Then came a high-pitched yelp. I rushed out the back door and stopped dead in my tracks. Marlene Kingsley was dangling halfway over my 6-foot wooden fence, one leg flailing, the other tangled in branches. Her pastel tracksuit was no match for the massive thorny rose bush she'd apparently landed in. She looked like a cat caught in barbed wire. "Sweet hell," I muttered, walking closer. "Marlene, what are you doing?" I slipped. She shrieked, trying to wriggle free. "I was checking for violations. You climbed my fence. It's within HOA rights if there's suspected non-compliance." "No, it's trespassing," I said, grabbing my phone. "And you're lucky you didn't break your neck," she froze. "You wouldn't dare call the police. You climbed over my locked fence and landed in my roses. You think that's legal?" she blustered, red-faced and squirming deeper into the thorns. "I'm on official HOA business." I took a few pictures, her hanging there like a garden gnome gone rogue, clipboard stuck in a branch, and dialed the non-emergency line. "Hope you're comfortable," I said, "because you're going to be explaining this to a cop." Her face went pale. Officer Delgado arrived 20 minutes later, sunglasses perched on his nose, notebook in hand, and a look that said he'd already had enough nonsense for one afternoon. He stepped through the side gate after I pointed him around, stopping short at the sight of Marlene tangled in my rose bush like some deranged holiday ornament. "Ma'am," he said, deadpan, "you want to explain how you ended up in this situation?" Marlene had finally managed to sit upright, though the effort had left her hair matted and her pride visibly cracked. Her face, scratched in 3 places, twitched as she tried to regain control of the narrative. "I had probable cause," she declared, brushing a thorn off her sleeve. "There's a municipal clause that allows HOA officials to conduct emergency visual inspections." Delgado raised a hand. "Stop, I'm not asking about bylaws. I'm asking why you're physically inside this man's private, fenced yard without his consent." She hesitated. "Well, he's refused multiple requests to allow an inspection." "That's not justification for trespassing," he said, flipping to a fresh page in his notebook. "Especially not by climbing a 6-foot fence. You didn't even knock." "I did knock. He didn't answer." "I was in my kitchen," I said. "There was no knock. I've got a doorbell camera." Marlene glared at me but didn't argue. Delgado sighed. "All right. Let's get you out of the bush first." He helped her to her feet, avoiding the thorns with practiced ease. She winced as he guided her to the gate. "I'm going to need your ID," he said. "That's unnecessary," she snapped. "It is," he replied. "You entered private property without permission." "That's criminal trespass." Her face turned a deeper shade of red, but she handed over her license. Delgado turned to me. "Would you like to press charges?" I took a breath. "I'd like to file a formal complaint for now. I want this documented." This isn't just about today, there's been a pattern of overreach. If she tries to retaliate, I want this incident on record, he nodded. Smart. I'll log the report and forward it to the city attorney. You're well within your rights. Marlene opened her mouth, but Delgado cut her off. I'd advise you not to speak further without a lawyer, he said. Especially if you're acting under the authority of an HOA, you're not law enforcement, you don't get to bypass property rights. He left her standing on the sidewalk while he took my statement inside. I showed him the footage from the fence cam I'd installed a few months back just in case. It clearly showed her scaling the fence in broad daylight, no knock, no hesitation. That's pretty damning, he said, watching the clip play out. She didn't even try to conceal it. She's gotten too comfortable, I said. Everyone on this street's afraid of her. I'm just the first one to tell her no. He jotted something down. You might want to talk to your neighbors. If there's a pattern, a group complaint could carry more weight. Especially if the HOA's violating its own charter. When Delgado left, Marlene was already gone, her clipboard abandoned in my yard like a broken shield. I locked the gate and went back inside, but I wasn't done. That evening, I printed copies of the footage and started knocking on doors. First stop, the Ramirez family 2 houses down. They'd been fined last month over a swing set the HOA claimed was aesthetic pollution. Yorick, Mrs. Ramirez answered, her toddler clinging to her leg. Everything okay, I held up the USB drive. You'll want to see this. They invited me in. I showed them the footage and explained what had happened. She did what? Mr. Ramirez asked, leaning forward. She actually climbed your fence, landed in my roses, I said. Police report's been filed, but I think it's bigger than this. I think she's been abusing her position for a while. They exchanged a look. She fined us twice last month, Mrs. Ramirez said. We appealed, but the board sided with her, said our appeal was poorly formatted. She's the board president, I said. She's the one who decides if the format's acceptable. We sat in their kitchen for another hour, listing grievances, pulling up email threads, and comparing HOA notices. By the time I left, we had a plan and 6 more households ready to talk. The next morning, I called my cousin Lena. She's a real estate attorney who once took down a rogue HOA in San Diego. I explained everything, and she didn't hesitate. Get me their charter, she said. Their meeting minutes, election records, and the covenants. I'll tell you if they've overstepped. I spent the next 2 days gathering paperwork. Turns out the HOA hadn't held a legitimate board election in over 3 years. The same 3 individuals, Marlene, her sister-in-law, and a guy named Brent who lived rent-free in Marlene's guest house, had won the last 3 cycles with no posted ballots and no open nominations. Lena confirmed what I suspected. This isn't just overreach, she said. It's procedural fraud. If you and the neighbors call a special meeting under the rules in the CC and Articus, you can vote them out and elect a new board. If that fails, you can petition the city's Housing Oversight Committee. We made flyers. We scheduled a block meeting. We went door to door, explaining the situation. Some people were hesitant at first, but once I played the video of Marlene dangling in my backyard for a few of them, the tone changed. She climbed. Wait, rewind that, said Mr. Greaves, the retired firefighter from across the street. She actually shimmied up the lattice like a raccoon. She landed face first in my roses. He laughed so hard he nearly dropped his coffee. She's lost her mind. By the end of the week, we had 15 households on board, more than enough per the bylaws to request an emergency vote of no confidence. We submitted our formal demand via certified mail, forcing them to call a meeting. Marlene tried to delay it. Claimed technical difficulties with scheduling, then said the room at the community center was overbooked. No one bought it. Lena had already coordinated with the city clerk's office to secure a space and issued a public notice. The meeting was happening, whether Marlene liked it or not. The night of the vote, the community center was packed. Even residents I hadn't met before showed up. Marlene sat at the front, nursing a bandaged wrist and trying to look composed, but the tension in her jaw betrayed her. When it was my turn to speak, I stepped up to the mic and played the fence footage on the projector. Gasps echoed across the room. "I'm not here to humiliate anyone," I said, "but we deserve better. This isn't just one bad decision, it's a pattern: unauthorized fines, intimidation. No elections, no transparency, that ends tonight." A few people applauded. Marlene stood, interrupting. "This is a smear campaign," she said. "You people don't understand what it takes to run a community." "I've sacrificed, you've controlled," said Mrs. Ramirez, rising from her seat. "There's a difference." We held the vote. Paper ballots counted publicly. 31 in favor of immediate removal and re-election. Only 3 opposed. Marlene didn't even stay to see the results. She stormed out before the final tally. Afterward, Lena helped us nominate a temporary board and file the paperwork with the county. We formed a transparency committee, opened the books, and discovered over $5,000 in misallocated beautification fund expenses, all tied to Marlene's address. The city investigated. Subpoenas were filed. Turns out she'd been reimbursing herself for landscaping assessments that were never performed. When the dust settled, Marlene was facing civil penalties and a potential fraud charge. Brent moved out within a week. The HOA charter was amended to require third-party election oversight moving forward. As for me, I planted new roses, taller ones, with extra thorns. The week after the vote, everything went quiet, too quiet. Marlene vanished from the neighborhood like a raccoon after a porch light flicks on. Her house sat dark most evenings, blinds drawn tight, no porch lights, no movement. Even the plastic flamingos she used to line her walkway had disappeared. But something about the silence didn't sit right with me. I'd seen her type before, the kind who didn't know how to lose. And sure enough, trouble returned on a Tuesday, just after dusk. I was walking my dog, Hank, around the corner near the model homes when I noticed the landscaping truck. The logo on the side was familiar. It was the same company Marlene once bragged about hiring for her personal beautification projects. The only issue was, they weren't trimming trees or mowing lawns. They were unloading pavers and rolls of sod right into the common area greenbelt. I led Hank closer, pretending to check my phone. "You guys working late?" I asked one of the crewmen. He glanced up, wiping sweat off his brow. "Yeah," Kingsley rushed the order, said we had to get it all installed by morning. "Kingsley?" I asked. "She's not on the board anymore." He looked confused. "She signed the work order last week, said it was for approved HOA upgrades, prepaid everything, we just follow the paperwork." I didn't argue. I snapped a photo of the truck's inventory and walked away. Something was off. There hadn't been any bids, no budget approvals, no mention of landscaping changes at the last meeting. And Marlene wasn't authorized to spend a dime. The next morning, I met with Lena and the new treasurer, a retired accountant named Fran. We dug into the HOA's vendor receipts and found the invoice sitting in the system flagged as routine grounds enhancement. It had been submitted 2 days before the vote and paid in full from the General Reserve Fund. "She slipped this in before the meeting," Fran said, adjusting her glasses. "And the payment cleared the day after she was voted out." "She backdated the authorization," Lena said. "Classic maneuver, but if she signed it after she was removed, it's fraud." It got worse. That afternoon, I received a call from a man named Ruben Patel, a software engineer who lived in the townhouse cluster by the East Gate. He'd been going through old email records and cross-referencing them against HOA disbursements. What he found made the landscaping stunt look like amateur hour. "She rerouted irrigation upgrades to her own property," he said. "The HOA paid for new plumbing lines, but the pipes lead to her backyard. I traced the permits." I met Ruben that evening. He had a laptop full of documentation, permits, invoices, even a time-stamped drone image from 6 months ago showing a trench dug from the greenbelt directly to Marlene's side yard. "She buried the pipes under decorative gravel," he said. "I confirmed it by pinging the utility line map." The HOA paid over $20,000 for community irrigation improvements, and not a drop of water goes to the greenbelt. We brought it all to Lena. She didn't hesitate. This crosses into grand larceny, she said. And if she tampered with public utility records to hide it, that's a felony. We compiled everything into a single file: bank records, vendor quotes, permit scans, drone images, and HOA meeting minutes. Lena handed it off to the district attorney's office the next morning. By Friday, the sheriff's department issued a subpoena. They showed up at Marlene's door with a warrant and 2 unmarked sedans. I watched from my kitchen window as they searched her house, retrieved 2 laptops, and hauled out a locked filing cabinet. She stood on the porch in a wrinkled cardigan, arms crossed, lips pressed so tight they looked bloodless. The neighborhood buzzed with whispers. She skimmed HOA funds. I heard she had a secret irrigation line. No wonder her lawn was always green during the water restrictions. But the real shock came the following week when the city released preliminary findings. Turns out Marlene had been funneling HOA money into her personal property for over 3 years. In addition to the irrigation job, she charged the HOA for pest control visits that never occurred, holiday lighting installations that only decorated her house, and even a power washing service that exclusively cleaned her driveway. The total theft exceeded $85,000. People were furious, not just because of the money, but because of how long she'd gotten away with it, and how she'd used the HOA as a shield, issuing fines and threats to anyone who questioned her decisions. "I almost moved because of her," said Mr. Greaves at the next community meeting. "She wrote me up for a cracked bird bath. Meanwhile, she was embezzling tens of thousands. The city froze the HOA's operating account pending a full audit. Lena helped set up a temporary emergency fund using voluntary contributions to keep basic services running: trash pickup, street lighting, and the pool maintenance contract. Marlene was arrested 2 weeks later on charges of felony fraud, misappropriation of funds, and willful falsification of records. The court denied her bail after the prosecution argued she had attempted to alter HOA databases after her removal. Apparently, she'd logged in from her home IP address and tried to delete several old meeting records only to trigger a backup protocol that recorded everything. When the trial date was announced, residents lined up to give statements. Fran submitted a detailed financial timeline. Ruben provided drone footage and permit discrepancies. I gave a full report of the landscaping truck incident, including the rushed midnight installation. Marlene's defense tried to argue that she had acted in good faith, claiming the board had previously authorized her to use discretion on beautification matters. But when asked to produce written approval, she had nothing. Lena, who was now recognized as the HOA's legal liaison, presented a copy of the charter which clearly required majority approval for any expense exceeding $500. The trial lasted 4 days. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 5 years in state prison, with restitution to be paid in full. Her house was seized as part of the settlement. The property was auctioned off, and the proceeds returned to the HOA's reserve fund. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt light again. Kids rode bikes without being followed by clipboard patrols. People put up wind chimes and painted their mailboxes without someone photographing them. The board opened a public suggestion forum, and Fran implemented a transparent budgeting system. Every dollar accounted for. Every meeting recorded and posted online. One evening, Ruben and I stood near the greenbelt, watching as a new contractor installed real irrigation lines, ones that actually watered the community lawn. "I still can't believe she tried to retrofit her own home with HOA money," he said. "She climbed over my fence to look for a rose bush violation," I replied. "How did we not see it sooner?" "Because we trusted her title," he said, "not her character." We watched the sprinklers switch on, misting the grass in wide arcs, no secret pipes, no special treatment. Just water where it belonged, and a neighborhood finally breathing again. The first board meeting after the trial drew more residents than anyone expected. Folding chairs filled the community center's event room end to end, with some neighbors standing along the walls or leaning against the windowsills. The atmosphere was no longer tense or suspicious, it was expectant, like the moment before a new mayor takes the podium in a town that's just voted out a dictator. Fran sat at the head of the table, flanked by two newly elected board members, a retired paralegal named Cyrus and a school administrator named Delilah. Both had won their positions in a special election held a week prior, and neither had any prior connection to Marlene or her former associates. Their mandate was clear: transparency, fairness, and repair. I sat 3 rows back, behind Ruben and Mrs. Alvarez, who had brought a thick folder filled with old complaint letters she'd written over the years, none of which had ever been acknowledged, let alone answered. Delilah stood and addressed the room. "Before we begin with new business, we're going to open the floor. If anyone has questions about the audit, the election, or the future of this HOA, now is the time." A man near the back raised his hand. "My name's Darren. I moved in 6 months ago. I was told there was a community improvement fund I had to contribute to. I paid over $3,000. Is that money gone?" Cyrus flipped through a binder and found the page. "That fund was real," he said, "but it was never used for the community. It went directly into a private account tied to a shell landscaping vendor." A hush fell over the room. Delilah nodded. "We've frozen the remaining assets and submitted a restitution claim through the court. The good news is the house sale covered most of the losses. Everyone who paid into that fund should receive a refund within 60 days. Mrs. Alvarez tapped Ruben's shoulder. "They actually listened to the judge," she whispered, stunned. He whispered back without turning, "because they're not criminals." Fran cleared her throat. "We're also implementing a vendor hiring policy requiring 3 competitive bids, which will be reviewed by a rotating oversight committee made up of volunteers from the community." More hands went up. No one was angry now, just curious, cautious, and ready to be part of something better. By the time the meeting adjourned, 12 people had signed up for the oversight committee, including Darren, Mrs. Alvarez, and a teenager named Maya whose family had faced a bogus noise complaint under the old regime. After the meeting, Delilah caught up with me in the parking lot while I was putting Hank in the backseat. "I just wanted to say thanks," she said. "You didn't have to push this as far as you did. Most people would have let it go after the vote." "I don't like leaving rot under the floorboards," I said, closing the trunk. "If we hadn't dug deeper, she would have walked away with more than a slap on the wrist." Delilah nodded. "The city's housing oversight rep called me this morning. They're using this case as a model for HOA reform proposals statewide." I paused. Statewide? Apparently, this wasn't an isolated case. There are other neighborhoods where the board's been weaponized. This one just happened to have a paper trail and someone who put up a fence. I didn't say anything for a moment. A breeze kicked up, blowing dry leaves across the lot. I watched as Hank pressed his nose against the window, eyes following the motion. "Let me know if they want more documentation," I said. "I still have the original footage backed up on 3 drives." Delilah smiled slightly. "I think you've done your part." The next morning, I walked the Greenbelt Trail with Hank. The new irrigation system had already transformed the place. The grass, once dry and patchy, now held a soft green sheen. The newly planted trees paid for with funds from the recovered surplus had tiny wooden tags next to them listing their species and care instructions. A group of kids rode scooters along the path, laughing as they raced past the community bulletin board, which now displayed open meeting dates, maintenance schedules, and a list of current board members with contact info. Ruben joined me halfway through the loop, holding a printout in his hand. I ran another sweep of the old HOA server logs, he said, falling into step beside me. There's one thing left, something that doesn't quite add up. I raised an eyebrow. Go on. 2 months before the vote, Marlene approved a purchase order for a security camera system. But there's no installation record, no equipment delivery, and the supplier listed doesn't exist. Phantom invoice looks that way, but the amount was small, under $300. It didn't trigger any flags. I took the paper from him. The vendor listed was called Sentry View Tactical Ops, sounded more like a mall cop fantasy than a real company. Could be nothing, I said. Or it could be the start of another rabbit hole, he shrugged. I'll keep digging. At worst, it's a blip. At best, another breadcrumb. I folded the paper and tucked it into my jacket. Let me know what you find. Later that week, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a flash drive and a note written in all caps. You made a mistake. No signature, no other contents. I plugged it into an old laptop I kept offline. The drive contained a single folder labeled Meeting Backup. Inside were audio files, over 20 of them recordings of closed-door board meetings Marlene had held with Brent and her sister-in-law. They were raw, unfiltered, and damning. In one, Brent joked about faking a pest infestation to justify charging a unit for extermination. In another, Marlene discussed burying a complaint about her illegal extension by shredding the letter and marking it unread in the database. The most chilling file included a conversation about finding a reason to disqualify a neighbor from running for the board. They discussed combing through her social media for anything that could be twisted into a violation of the HOA's morality clause. I copied the files and sent them to Lena, Fran, and the district attorney's office. 2 weeks later, Brent was arrested on charges of conspiracy to commit fraud and obstruction of justice. The sister-in-law fled the state but was picked up in Nevada after using a canceled HOA credit card at a hotel. The files also led to a deeper discovery. Marlene had once drafted a motion to install covert audio devices in the clubhouse under the pretense of monitoring vandalism. The motion was never submitted, but the intent combined with the audio files was enough to spark a wider investigation. The city launched a formal review of HOA surveillance practices across the county. New legislation followed, requiring all HOA meetings to be recorded and posted within 72 hours, with public access guaranteed. At the next board meeting, Delilah made the announcement. We've been asked to assist in drafting new state guidelines for HOA transparency, she said. Our neighborhood will be the pilot model. Applause broke out. I sat in the back, arms crossed, watching neighbors who had once been strangers work together like a real community. No more fines for lawn chairs. No more threats for wind chimes. No more climbing fences. Fran leaned over and whispered to me. You know, if you ever want to join the board, I'm good, I said, cutting her off with a grin. I like my roses better than bylaws. After the meeting, I walked home with Hank, the night breeze cool against my face. Porch lights glowed warmly along the street. The community felt alive again, not just functioning, but thriving. As I reached my gate, I looked at the rose bushes along the fence. Taller now, thicker, still thorny but blooming brighter than ever, I gave the fence a gentle pat and went inside.